Hello, I'm Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking about unions in education. Dennis Van Roekel is president of the National Education Association. The NEA has 3.2 million members and advocates for education professionals in Washington and around the country. Dennis has testified multiple times before Congress and is a member of the U.S. Department of Education's Equity and Excellence Commission. Welcome.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, thanks for coming. If we could start, if you don't mind saying a word or two about what is the NEA and what does the NEA stand for and who do you represent?
Well, the National Education Association is a union made up of 3.2 million individuals. We represent people from pre-K to graduate. We have about 200,000 members in higher education. But I think what's most important, I think most people would know that we're the largest labor union in America, but I don't know that they know our mission. And I'm very proud of our mission statement. We took it to our annual meeting, a representative assembly with some 9,000 delegates. And we talked about who we are. A mission statement to me is so powerful because it defines who you are, the reason you exist as an organization. And although we've been around for 154 years, we took a close look at that. And our mission is to advocate for educational professionals and to unite our members and the nation to fulfill the promise of public education to prepare every child to succeed in a diverse and interdependent world. Big challenge.
Fair enough. And how is that different from the mission of the AFT or the AAUP?
Well, I think AFT's mission would be very similar to ours. I don't know the exact wording of theirs, but they too are very much in the education arena. They also have employees in healthcare and public service workers. AAUP is mainly a higher education unit, but all of them have one thing very much in common. We bring people together so that they have a voice.
And in terms of that voice, you're obviously a powerful union. How do you view yourself relative to, let's say, miners or relative to workers who work in a hotel?
Well, obviously our work is very different, but the concept of a union is one that it transcends all of the different occupations. I mean, the United States of America is a union of states. It's nothing more than a group of people coming together who have common ideals and who use collective action to work to achieve those ideals. I mean, nothing in America was accomplished without collective action. It was people coming together when they believed deeply in something. So my union just happens to be a group of 3.2 million people who work in education and who have very strong feelings about what ought to happen from pre-K to graduate, and we want our voices heard.
And speaking of your voices, I mean, you've probably heard the criticism that sometimes that the unions are too powerful, particularly the education unions are too powerful as it relates to school reform. How would you respond to that?
Well, one of the things I think is important is that the concept of collaboration. If you really want to change a system to make it deliver for the students we serve, I don't think that's possible without involving the school board, the administration, and the employees in their union. If you want to make lasting, sustainable change, you must involve all of the people who are engaged in that entity. So I think it's important that collaboration happen. No one of those three can do it by themselves. So there's a legitimate role for all three, and when they come to the table together, reach out to parents in the community, and together they decide what needs to happen to deliver to the kids in America, I think it will work.
Well, and speaking of working, I mean, how do you think that when a school, let's say a high school, what percentage of the budget for that high school is going to go to teacher salaries?
In the education industry, it's very heavily in salaries because it's people. I mean, there are industries that have very few people and machines do all the work, so obviously their payroll would be less. Education, it's people intensive. And so the high percentage in K-12 districts, the percent of budget that goes to personnel would probably be somewhere around 70%. And higher education, depending on the institution, that would vary from that. But higher education or K-12 or pre-K is very much people intensive, and so obviously it is an industry that many of the resources go to salaries.
But then that presents an interesting question for society, right? Because if you have, let's say on the higher ed front, if kids are spending a lot of money for tuition, right, and let's say they don't have that money, they're essentially taking out loans for tuition, and they're paying money to sustain this education entity, then we've got students paying essentially the salaries of the people who work at the universities.
Absolutely true. But it's a system. And I think one of the things we don't do often enough is think about that whole system. You can't have a college or university or a K-12 system without people. People have to be there, and you need to invest in those people. So it's not an either or, and it's not a better or worse. It's creating a system that, number one, delivers to the students what they need. I think most people see K-12 more uniformly in terms of what the needs of those students are. In higher education, it varies greatly. Our community college system, there are many individuals who go to a community college in this world to be retrained, to get a course in the subject area they need to find a new job because theirs was shipped overseas. You have people who are just interested in bettering themselves. In this day and age, education doesn't end at any age. It's a lifelong process. And so you have many people enrolled based on their interests, and they want to take courses. So they're not all there to get a degree. At the four-year universities, although more are there to obtain a degree, you still have the same people going in and out of the experience because of what they need. So I just think it's a wonderful opportunity that we provide in this nation, that regardless of your age and regardless of where you live, there ought to be a place where you can get that education.
I think you're right. I mean, obviously we want to encourage more people to not only get a formal education, we want to encourage people to have an informal education. But I wonder if there's a way of kind of saving some money here, of having students go to schools where they spend a little bit less money. Is there a way of doing that in some way?
Well, the interesting thing to me about the investment in education, I don't consider it an expenditure. I really do believe in it. It is an investment. Out of all the different uses of tax dollars, those that are spent in education, to support education from pre-K to graduate, have a better return on the dollar than any other dollar used for tax dollars. So it truly is an investment. So I think it's most important that we start thinking about what is it that we want for America 10 or 15 or 25 years from now, and what are the investments we need to make in order to ensure that future. One of those has to be education. And if we don't make that investment, or if we say we'll cut it short in order to save a few dollars, you will lose far more than you saved in the short term.
And speaking about the long and short term, you're very active on Capitol Hill in terms of lobbying. Would you mind saying a word or two about some of the current lobbying work that you're doing?
Well, there's so much going on in Congress right now. This week, probably the thing that we're focusing on, because Thursday it'll be voted on, is the Jobs for America Act. It's a bill that has about $30 billion for school modernization, both community college and K-12. And it also has about $30 billion to rehire people who are being laid off because of the budget crisis, about 280,000 jobs. It, to me, is such a win-win. Americans need jobs. Those are the parents of the students that we have in pre-K through graduate, and they need jobs. Secondly, many of our students go to schools that are in dire need of modernization. The average age of schools in America is over 40 years old, and with technology changing the way we do, so it's a great investment. Other things we talk about is the reauthorization of the Elementary Secondary Education Act. This came into being under President Johnson many years ago. It's on a cycle to be reauthorized every 6 years. Our current law, named No Child Left Behind, was authorized in January of 2002. We're overdue. We need a good reauthorization of that bill.
Well, I guess I've got a two-part question on that. One, in terms of the No Child Left Behind, whether or not you have a word or two about the waivers that a number of states, as you know, are asking for waivers on that. And the second question is a more global question, which is where are we finding the money to pay for this bill, assuming that it is a good idea, but where's the money coming from?
Well, the money is already there. ESEA has been there for many, many years. And the question is how much, and are we meeting the needs of today's students adequately? And that's a real consideration. So to me, it's not really an issue of cost. But what we do see in the reauthorization of ESEA, there are some things in the No Child Left Behind that we believe need to be changed dramatically. There's an overemphasis on testing, and it's a very narrow testing, English and math. And as a high school math teacher for 23 years, I know the value of math, but I also understand the importance and value of educating the whole child. The arts, the sciences, history, civics education, All of that should be part of the discussion. So as we look toward the reauthorization of ESEA, we want to make sure that we're providing students a robust education that really prepares them not to just get a job, but to be citizens of this great democracy.
But how do we make sure that the schools are accountable? I mean, I'm all for, I agree with you that No Child Left Behind perhaps has too much emphasis on testing. But at some point, who's evaluating whether or not the schools are effective or not?
Well, I think the public school system is evaluated constantly. It's a public system. We have publicly elected school boards who decide what the goals and objectives for that school would be. And accountability is absolutely essential. We should be accountable to the students to make sure they're getting what they need to be prepared for college and or a career. Secondly, we need to be accountable to the public. Are we spending those tax dollars well, and are we providing for their children? But it's a shared accountability. It's not just the people who work there. It's the community, it's the policymakers, it's the parents. It's all of us together putting together that system. I remember an old politician in Arizona who was talking to a retired group and kind of chastising them that they weren't supporting the public schools that day. And he said, I know you're retired and you don't think you have an obligation. He said, but I have a question. How many of you were a child one day? And the audience kind of chuckled, and he said, if somebody invested in you when you were a child, you have a responsibility to invest in every child today. And I think that's a great attitude for all of us. We need to invest now for future generations, just as someone invested in us.
Fair enough. And how do other countries do it in terms of reforming their schools? Are there powerful teachers' unions overseas as well?
You know, it's very interesting. This last spring, the Department of Education, along with NEA and the American Federation of Teachers and Education International, which is the global confederation of unions from all over the world, we had a summit, an international summit. And we brought in all of the countries, the highest performing countries, the ones that are always held up as examples: Singapore, Ontario, Canada, Finland. And what you'll find in those countries is, number one, their union participation exceeds ours. Most of them have union membership of over 90%. And what they say is that they believe absolutely in that collaboration. They wouldn't think of doing anything in education without involving the union. And it makes sense. Why in the world would you try and change a system and not involve the very people who work there? Secondly, they don't rely on high-stakes standardized tests. They consider those very much less of importance, because what they do instead is they look at tests that are formative, give information to teachers. Are the students learning what you're presenting? Are there ways to present it differently? So it's an ongoing assessment through the year, with the goal always being for students to achieve. I think the third thing they do that's different from in our country is they very much focus on quality at the front door of the teaching profession. In America, we seem to be going the opposite direction. We want to open the door wide to let anyone in, and then we say, and if you're really terrible, we'll make it easy to fire you. I think that system is absolutely broken. The idea that your recruitment, training, and hiring practices don't work. In our country, we lose 47% of all teachers hired within 5 years. That doesn't make sense. And what these high-performing countries do instead is they want to make sure, first of all, they recruit from high-achieving students. Secondly, they do a lot of assessment to see, is teaching your profession? Not everyone is made to be a teacher, just like everyone isn't made to be an electrician or a plumber or a college professor. We're all different. And then once they make those selections, they actually pay for their college. And no one is allowed in the classroom until you have your master's degree and are fully trained, licensed, and certified. I think that we can learn from those high-performing countries.
But then why don't we have more programs like Teach for America, where kids are going to come in for a year or two and do the best they can? If we know we're already losing 40 or 47% of people, who are teachers, why not bring in some young people who can kind of fill some of those gaps?
Well, one of the things I think is really important for me, as a high school math teacher for 23 years, I can tell you I value my profession. And it is a profession. And I don't believe you build any profession by having people rotate in for 1 or 2 years. I mean, think of any other profession. When you go to a doctor, do you want the resident, the one just out of medical school, or do you want a board-certified surgeon? When you go to a lawyer, do you go for a partner, or do you want the one right out of law school? You learn. And I can tell you as a teacher, my best 9 years of teaching were my last 9. Because I grew every single year. I want to build a profession that, number one, deals with quality at the front door, and from day one, it's about career development, that you never stop getting better. You learn more about how to relate to students. You learn more about cultural competence so that as immigrants from all over the world are coming in your classroom, you know better how to reach those. We have teachers now in incredible professional development programs about how to teach English language learners. You may have grown up in an area where it was only English. Now in your classroom you may have 5 or 10 different languages. What is it that you need to know to best serve those students? So I see it as a career of learning, and that you never get even start day one without proper training.
Fair enough. In terms of the training, when you were teaching, did you find the training to be most valuable in your subject area, in math, or did you find training to be valuable in terms of how to be a teacher, per se?
I think it absolutely is a combination of the two. I can't imagine walking into a math classroom and not knowing the content, but I consider that the floor, not the ceiling. I mean, my job was never to go into a room and demonstrate to my students that I already know how to do all the problems in the book. No, my job was to take knowledge that I knew, that I considered fairly easy. I loved math, and I thought it was fun to do math. Not all of my students shared that passion. So it was my job to create a learning environment for them to learn. And see, that's a set of professional skills, not content. So it's a silly argument to me, is it content or professional skill? It is a combination. You must have content, and from there on, it's developing the professional skills to create a learning environment that the students in that room can learn what you know.
Fair enough. And if we could move on to some of the tough issues that we're facing at different universities in terms of tenure. As you well know, tenure is a hot button issue. But you can see both sides, at least from where I'm sitting, where on one hand we want to protect professors who may be doing some research that perhaps is not popular, right? And where else should they be doing? As a society, we want to encourage people to do that kind of research. But at what point do we pull the plug and we say, you're so far out of the mainstream that why are we spending society's resources on this?
Again, I think it's a balance. You're right, the need for tenure was established long before we had unions. And it was because some people were dismissed simply because they weren't in the mainstream. And when we say mainstream, for some it was a very narrow mainstream. It were the people who ran that university and said, unless you agree with me, you're out of my mainstream. So the need was very great. We need to protect that. Academic freedom is essential, especially in a democracy. The idea that you would ever come up with a scenario where we no longer need academic freedom or the right to protect someone from arbitrary or capricious judgment to remove them, I just don't think that day will come. There is a balance. If there needs to be well-defined, efficient procedures. If someone shouldn't be there, there ought to be a process where you make that charge, give an opportunity for someone to defend that, and make a decision. So it's a balance of the two.
But then how do we protect the adjuncts? As you, I'm sure, well know, there's a huge growth in the number of adjuncts at universities throughout the United States, primarily for budget reasons. How do we protect adjuncts?
We need to do much more in protecting the rights of adjuncts, not only their rights, but also their pay and compensation. You're so right in the number of full-time tenure track employees and professors is on the severe decline. And as a result, the number of contingent and part-time employees it's increased dramatically. And I don't think we've caught up to figure out how do we deal fairly with that group of people. And we need to do much more in bringing equity to that group.
Well, I was an adjunct back in the day in Philadelphia, and I taught at a few universities, and I was in my 20s, and I was very happy to get that job. And I don't remember how much I got paid, but it was probably a little bit less than this pen, and I didn't get paid very much, but I appreciated the job, and I thought I did a very good job. But if I remember correctly, I had no protections whatsoever.
None. And to me, that's not how you build a good, solid university system. It's just, as we talked about in K-12, someone there for 1 or 2 years, I want people to be there as a career. I think they grow in that, and I think it adds substance to a university. I think there's a need for adjunct and part-time, but I don't think it can be all of that. I believe you must have a core and solid full-time tenured staff who are permanent, who are there. And then with the adjunct and part-time, we have to define what does that mean? What are the protections you have? As adults, if we have families, we buy a home, we have children, I don't think it's right to put people in a situation where you never know from one day to the next whether you have a job. I think in any industry, they ought to give some sort of semblance of a system that you know what the future holds, not long term, but at least in the near term.
But the counterpoint to that, of course, is the issue of budgeting. So when I taught in Philadelphia, I got paid presumably a very small fraction of what I would have gotten paid had I been a tenured faculty member. And so presumably the university was doing that not because they loved me so much, it's because they liked me and I was saving them money.
Yeah, we talked about the difference between cost versus investment, and I think we have to get back to this concept of investment. You know, one of the questions when they're trying to save money they forget to ask is, what is the purpose? When I look at a K-12 or a university system, what is the purpose of that system? And it's not to provide something that is cheapest. I mean, obviously you want to be efficient and to use those dollars well, but the real purpose is to provide American citizens for what they need. Whether you're just starting your education process or you're an adult looking for retraining or going to a new career, it's all of those opportunities that exist. One of the things in America that I think we fail to really take hold of and appreciate is that in our country, we don't value education more than other nations. Every nation, every society has recognized the importance and value of education. In America, what we changed, what we made unique is who got it. We said we ought to make it available to everyone. Tuitions are going out of sight. The idea that someone graduates from college with $40,000 to $80,000 in debt, how do you begin a life? We need to come back to the point of saying the purpose of this higher education is to prepare people for not only jobs, but also for a life, a career in a democracy, and provide them a full education. We valued that as a nation when we first started, the value of education for every single person. We need to come back to that and say, are we providing? If not, then we need to find the resources to do that.
But that gets to then we're dealing with a generational issue where we're essentially using the political system today to make sure that there's protection for Professor Jones and Professor Smith, but we're saddling young people with tremendous amounts of debt.
Well, the reason the tuition has gone up, I mean, it's gone up twice and 3 times the cost of inflation for a number of years. It's getting to make it almost impossible for the middle class to be able to go to college. The problem isn't that we're paying them more, it's the support for those universities has really gone down. The amount of funding for public universities has plummeted in the last 10 years, and we need to figure out a way to do that differently. I think we're paying too high a price for the future. And one of the difficulties is it's in the political arena. You mentioned Congress before. House of Representatives, they run every 2 years, senators 6. But when you're talking about an education system and investing, you've got to talk about 10 and 15 and 20 years down the road. These countries that are leading the world, Finland and Singapore and Ontario, Canada, they didn't turn these systems around in 2 years. It takes long term. Great example. We know more from research that if you really want to change the potential and the opportunity for students, the best investment you can make is in pre-K education. And every leading country in the world does that, but not us. But you won't get results in 2 years or 3, but you must invest in those kids now in that pre-K if you really want to change their life in the future. We know that. It's not a question of not knowing what to do or how to do it. The only question is a question of will. Do we have the will to do it? And I think the resources are there if we find the will.
Can we find the will without the resources? Is my follow-up question to that. We're going to be out of time in a second, but assuming that somebody comes back and says, we don't have the resources, how can we better use what we've got to achieve the objectives that you articulately mentioned?
I think you can go to any classroom in America and you're finding the will every day. They'll give everything they have for the success of those students. They will do it with or without the resources. They'll give everything they can, but they need resources to do it right for every student. Some students have greater need. We must find a way to provide them.
But what if we don't have the resources? What do we do?
Well, as a nation, then you have to make choices. Our choice as a nation long ago was that we believed every citizen ought to have a right to do that. And the resources are there. The resources are there. Right now, it's a question of where do you spend those? And I think we need to invest in education.
Well, fair enough. Thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
If you would like additional information about the National Education Association or NEA's higher education publications, please visit NEA.org or NEA.org keyword higher ed. If you have comments or suggestions about higher education today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.